The city was bustling with energy that day. People were gathered on the streets, enjoying the warm sunshine, and the atmosphere felt festive. It was a special occasion, a royal visit that had drawn large crowds. Security had been tight, with royal guards stationed in various parts of the city, ensuring everything went smoothly. Their uniforms were immaculate, standing out with their strong, silent presence, guarding the streets while everyone around them celebrated. Among the crowd was a man who clearly didn't belong in the organized chaos of the event. He was stumbling, barely able to keep his balance. His clothes were untidy, and the distinct smell of alcohol hung around him. His face was flushed, and his eyes were a bit wild, betraying the level of drunkenness he had reached. He had wandered off from the celebration, perhaps trying to make his way to a different part of the city, but failing to do so in a graceful manner. People around him watched with concern as he continued to stumble through the crowd. At first, no one really paid him much attention. Drunk people weren't uncommon in such large gatherings, and most people continued with their day, not wanting to get involved in any drama. But it quickly became clear that this man was not just any ordinary drunken wanderer. His behavior started to draw attention. His loud voice echoed through the streets, and soon enough, he was yelling, though it was unclear at who or what. His words were slurred, barely understandable, and as his shouting continued, a few bystanders began to notice him more closely. The drunk man's eyes fixed on the royal guards standing in their positions nearby. The guards, standing tall and unmoving, had been scanning the crowd, ensuring everything was calm. They were the picture of professionalism, silent, stern, their gaze unwavering. But the drunk man didn't seem to care about their presence. His focus was sharp on them, and his shouting became more focused, turning into mocking jabs directed at the guards. It was clear he wasn't in his right mind, but the way he shouted and pointed at them made others start to feel uneasy. A couple of onlookers turned their heads, looking at the scene that was unfolding. No one was sure what to expect. The guards were still silent, standing firm, but it was obvious they were aware of the situation. They didn't react immediately, maintaining the calm composure that they were trained for. As the shouting grew louder, the drunk man started to make his way closer to one of the royal guards. His body language became more aggressive, and his gestures were exaggerated. He stumbled forward, his hands swaying wildly, clearly making little effort to control himself. People around him began to murmur to each other, trying to make sense of what was happening. Some of them even took a few steps back, preparing to leave the area in case things took a dangerous turn. The guards remained silent, still unmoving, their focus entirely on their task. They were trained to handle situations like this. Disruptive people, challenging behavior, but it was rare for something like this to happen during such a significant event. Everyone wondered what would happen next, and the atmosphere became tense. It wasn't just the drunk man's behavior that was alarming, but the feeling that something larger was about to unfold. People's eyes shifted from the man to the guards, then back again, waiting for something, anything, to happen. The situation continued to escalate, and the crowd's unease grew with every passing second. The drunk man's shouting had become more intense, and his movements, once random and erratic, now seemed more directed. His eyes locked onto the royal guard closest to him. The crowd held their breath as the man stumbled forward, still yelling insults, his voice slurred but sharp enough to cut through the noise of the busy street. The royal guards, however, stood as calm as ever. Their faces were stoic, unwavering, and they showed no signs of being rattled by the man's aggressive behavior. It was clear they had seen such disruptions before and had been trained to handle them with utmost composure. Their posture didn't change, but the energy around them felt heavier as the drunk man grew closer. People could sense that a moment of decision was approaching. A few onlookers began to murmur in concern, exchanging glances, wondering if the drunk man's antics would push the guards into action. The crowd had mostly kept their distance, but some curious eyes watched from a few steps back, waiting for something to happen. It was as if everyone was anticipating the inevitable, unsure of how the guards would react. The drunk man was now standing in front of the royal guard, his face flushed and twisted with anger, his words barely making sense. He seemed to be ranting about the guards' role in the event, questioning their authority, and making mocking comments about their uniforms. His gestures became more exaggerated, his hands flying around as if trying to emphasize every word. Some of the crowd started to inch away, sensing that things could go wrong in a split second. The guard closest to him didn't react. He didn't flinch, didn't move. His eyes remained focused straight ahead, not acknowledging the man's outbursts. This calmness only seemed to fuel the drunk man's frustration, and he began to get louder, stepping closer to the guard. The crowd watched, a mix of nervous tension and curiosity on their faces, wondering if the guard would finally do something to stop the disruption. But even as the drunk man continued his rant, the guard remained motionless, showing no signs of fear or anger. The crowd could feel the weight of the silence between the two, one man filled with rage, the other with an unshakable calm. For a moment, it seemed as if time stood still. People held their breath, waiting for what might happen next. A few others in the crowd had started to speak quietly to each other, wondering if the situation was getting out of hand. Would the guards finally make their move? Was this how the event would turn chaotic? The uncertainty in the air was palpable, yet the guards showed no sign of panic or irritation. They were trained for such moments, but would they act or remain passive? The tension built up, with everyone's eyes glued to the scene, waiting for the first sign of action. As the drunk man continued to stand in front of the royal guard, the tension reached a boiling point. The air seemed to thicken, and the crowd watched with bated breath, unsure of what would happen next. The man, growing increasingly frustrated, suddenly raised his arm. For a moment, it looked like he was about to swing his fist at the guard. But instead, his hand shot down to grab something from the nearby street vendor's stall, a glass bottle. The crowd gasped collectively as the man lifted the bottle, his eyes wide and full of determination. He looked as though he had completely lost control, as if the alcohol had taken over every part of his judgment. The bottle glinted in the sunlight as he held it up, pointing it in the direction of the guard. The people in the surrounding area took a few steps back, their eyes fixed on the unpredictable scene unfolding before them. Everyone held their breath, wondering what the man would do next. Without warning, the drunk man hurled the bottle through the air with surprising speed. It seemed like time slowed as the bottle spun through the sky, its trajectory aimed directly at the royal guard's head. The crowd cried out in shock, some people gasping in disbelief, others frozen in place, unable to believe what they were witnessing. The bottle was heading straight for the guard, and in the split second before impact, the entire scene was filled with a kind of stunned silence. But then something incredible happened. Just as the bottle was about to collide with the guard's head, he made a sudden, almost imperceptible movement. His arm shot out, and with the precision of someone who had spent years training, he deflected the bottle with a quick motion of his hand. It wasn't a violent throw or a desperate dodge. It was a fluid, controlled move that seemed effortless. The bottle ricocheted off the guard's hand and sailed harmlessly into the air, landing on the ground with a soft thud far from the crowd. The drunk man stood there for a moment, staring in shock, completely unable to comprehend what had just happened. He blinked, his mind struggling to catch up with the reality of the situation. The people around him were just as stunned. The tension that had been building in the air melted away, replaced by a mix of amazement and confusion. The bottle had been thrown with such force, and yet, in the blink of an eye, the guard had managed to prevent it from causing any harm. The royal guard didn't flinch, didn't even seem bothered by the close call. His expression remained unchanged, calm and collected, as if this was just another day on the job. He didn't make a show of it, and there was no anger in his eyes. The whole thing seemed so smooth, so controlled, that it left everyone wondering. Was this part of the training? Was it sheer skill, or was there something else at play? The crowd's shock began to give way to whispers. Some people muttered about how incredible it was to witness the guard's swift reaction, while others just stared at him in awe, not sure what to say. The drunk man, now realizing his action had failed to have the desired effect, stood frozen. He had expected a confrontation, a reaction, perhaps even chaos. But instead, he found himself face to face with a man who seemed almost unaffected by the whole ordeal. For a brief moment, the world seemed to pause. No one knew how to respond. The royal guard had just made it look so easy, so effortless, and the drunk man, who had moments ago been shouting in anger, was now standing quietly, still trying to process the fact that his plan had fallen apart before his eyes. The crowd, still in a state of disbelief, slowly began to exhale, the tension lifting as the scene unfolded into something far less dramatic than anyone had anticipated. The drunk man stood still for a few moments, completely dumbfounded. His eyes were wide, blinking repeatedly as though he was trying to make sense of what had just happened. The bottle that had once been his weapon now lay harmlessly on the ground, its contents still intact, its purpose entirely defeated. He looked from the bottle to the guard, his face a mixture of confusion and disbelief. What had just happened? How had the bottle not hit the guard? And why had the guard not even flinched? The crowd, too, was still processing the events. Some were whispering to each other, shaking their heads in disbelief. How had the royal guard reacted so quickly? Was that part of his training, or had it been pure instinct? The unexpected move left everyone in a state of quiet shock, and for a few seconds, it felt like time itself had paused. The moment felt surreal. The drunk man's earlier bravado had completely evaporated. He was no longer the loud, aggressive figure he had been just moments before. Now he was simply standing there, staring at the guard, unsure of what to do next. The royal guard remained perfectly still, his gaze unwavering, his posture straight as an arrow. He hadn't moved except for that brief, almost graceful deflection of the bottle. His composure was remarkable. It was clear he wasn't shaken, and he wasn't angry either. The guard's expression didn't change at all. He remained calm and collected, his focus unwavering from the task at hand. He didn't shout, didn't move aggressively toward the drunk man. He simply stood there, a silent figure of authority. The drunk man took a few unsteady steps backward, still staring at the guard, but he was no longer speaking. His anger had deflated, replaced by confusion and fear. His earlier outburst had not achieved what he'd intended, and now he seemed to realize that he had pushed things too far. The crowd around him began to murmur, some people clearly relieved that things hadn't turned violent. They had been expecting the worst. The situation had seemed so tense, but instead it had ended with nothing more than a swift, controlled reaction. The air still felt heavy with uncertainty, but there was no more shouting. The drunk man continued to back away slowly, his eyes darting from the royal guard to the ground. He knew he couldn't continue like this, not after what had just happened. There was no fight left in him now. The guard hadn't been rattled in the slightest, and it had become abundantly clear that the drunk man was out of his depth. As the man took a few more unsteady steps back, a soft voice from the crowd broke the silence, suggesting that he might want to leave before things got worse. The words were gentle but firm, and they seemed to snap the drunk man back into reality. He hesitated for a moment longer, then turned, stumbling away into the crowd, his head still spinning but now overwhelmed by the sense of humiliation and confusion. The crowd watched as he disappeared into the distance, and for a moment there was no sound. The guards returned to their usual positions, seemingly unaffected by the disruption. The event continued without another interruption, but the incident had left a mark on everyone who had witnessed it. The crowd was buzzing now, talking about the incredible display of control from the royal guard. The question on everyone's mind was the same. How had the guard reacted so calmly, so precisely? What did that tell them about the training and discipline that went into such roles? As the moment passed, the people in the crowd slowly began to go back to their previous conversations. The tension that had gripped the street began to dissolve, But the story of what had just happened would be something that everyone would be talking about for a long time. The guard's cool-headedness, his swift reaction, it was all anyone could think about now. It was the talk of the town, and it left everyone with one thought. Some situations, no matter how unexpected, could be handled with remarkable grace and control. As the drunk man disappeared into the crowd, the tension in the air began to dissipate. The people who had been watching the whole scene slowly started to move, some returning to their conversations, others still whispering about the strange and unexpected turn of events. The royal guard, who had remained so calm throughout the entire ordeal, didn't let his guard down even for a second. He was a steady, silent presence, standing as though nothing had happened. His expression hadn't changed, and he didn't seem affected by the incident at all. People began to notice the calm that surrounded him. There was something reassuring about it. His stillness wasn't rigid. It was controlled, practiced. It wasn't the kind of stillness that suggested weakness or fear. No, it was something much more profound. A quiet confidence that spoke volumes without a word being uttered. It wasn't just his physical composure. It was the way he handled the situation with such ease. It was almost as if this kind of thing happened every day, even though the crowd had never witnessed anything like it before. A few onlookers exchanged curious glances, wondering what the guards were thinking, what they had learned from the experience. But the guards were as focused as ever. They didn't share any looks or engage in conversations. They simply did their job, keeping watch over the crowd, making sure the event went smoothly. Despite the brief disruption, nothing had changed. The royal visit continued, and the guards resumed their positions without skipping a beat. Some people who had been too nervous to speak during the incident now found themselves discussing what had just happened. They marveled at the guards' reaction. "Did you see that?" One person asked in a hushed voice, as if not wanting to disturb the peaceful atmosphere that had returned. The way he deflected that bottle, it was like he knew exactly what was coming. Another person nodded in agreement. "I've never seen anything like that." He was so calm. Most people would have panicked or reacted. But he didn't flinch, didn't even raise his voice. There was a quiet agreement among the people around them. No one was really sure if they were more amazed by the guard's quick thinking or his complete lack of reaction. It was as if he had anticipated the man's actions, as if he had known all along that something like this might happen. The crowd buzzed with theories, but no one could quite figure out how the guard had managed to stay so composed in such a high-pressure moment. Meanwhile, the royal guards continued to keep their watch. There was no change in their demeanor. They weren't concerned with what had just happened. They were focused on the task ahead. Their job was to maintain order, and they had done that without even breaking a sweat. It was an impressive display of professionalism. As the event progressed, the crowd slowly grew quieter again, their attention drawn back to the ongoing royal visit. Yet the memory of the moment with the drunk man and the royal guard lingered in the background. For many, it would be something they would remember for days to come, a story they would share with friends and family. The remarkable calmness of the royal guard had left a lasting impression on everyone who had witnessed it. It was clear that sometimes the most extraordinary things happened in the quietest, most controlled moments. The royal guards, with their unwavering presence, had turned a potential crisis into nothing more than a minor disruption. And though it was over, the feeling of awe and respect for their professionalism remained. The crowd, despite the brief chaos, was now more united than ever in their admiration for the guard's ability to handle the unexpected with such grace. As the crowd gradually settled back into its rhythm, the incident with the drunk man seemed to fade from everyone's immediate concern. People had returned to enjoying the royal event, their chatter now about the spectacle they had just witnessed. However, a strange undercurrent of curiosity lingered, particularly surrounding the royal guards and their incredible composure. How had the situation unfolded so effortlessly? What was going through the mind of the royal guard who had deflected the bottle with such precision? The man who had caused the disturbance had quickly disappeared into the crowd, but the memory of his actions lingered. It wasn't every day that someone threw something at a royal guard after all. And even less common was a situation where the guard remained so calm, so collected. It was a display that would stay in the minds of many for days, even weeks to come. Despite the unsettling interruption, the royal guards did not appear to be bothered in the slightest. Their presence was as unwavering as it had been before the incident, their posture straight and disciplined, as though nothing had happened at all. They resumed their watch over the area with the same quiet authority they had demonstrated throughout the day. For them, it was just another moment in a long career of upholding peace and security, even in the most unpredictable circumstances. As the event continued, a figure from the royal entourage made their way through the crowd, attracting attention as they approached the guards. It wasn't the type of person the crowd had expected. Instead of one of the usual high-ranking officials or advisors, it was someone a bit more unexpected, a figure who seemed to have the power to influence what happened next. The figure, a well-dressed official, made their way toward the guard who had deflected the bottle. There was no sign of urgency in their steps, but it was clear that they had a certain purpose in mind. The crowd's whispers grew louder as they watched the official approach the guard. What would happen next? Would there be a reprimand for the drunk man, or would the situation be handled in a completely different way? The official stopped just a few feet away from the guard. The royal guard stood perfectly still, as if the presence of the official did not faze him at all. The crowd strained to hear their conversation. Their curiosity piqued. The official's voice was calm but firm as they spoke to the guard in low tones, but no one could make out the words from where they stood. After a brief exchange, the official turned to the crowd, their voice now rising to address the people around them. "The situation has been handled," they said, their words carrying with them an air of finality. "The man's actions were unfortunate, but it seems he was under the influence of alcohol. We will ensure he is taken care of without further disturbance. No harm was done, and the royal visit will continue as planned." The crowd seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. There would be no drama, no escalation, and no need for further confrontation. The situation was being taken care of quietly, without the need for any unnecessary commotion. It was a reminder that sometimes, even in the most unpredictable of circumstances, things could be handled with grace and efficiency. The official then turned back to the guards, offering a brief nod of approval, and moved on. The royal guards remained steady, their faces as calm as ever. As they continued their duty, the crowd slowly returned to its previous state of excitement, ready to enjoy the rest of the royal event. The earlier disturbance had been nothing more than a brief interruption, a reminder that even in moments of chaos, there were people who could bring everything back into focus with a steady hand and a calm mind. The event carried on without further issues, but the memory of how everything had been managed with such poise would remain in the minds of those who had witnessed it. The royal guard had shown them a level of professionalism that few could match, leaving everyone in awe of how easily they had restored order. It was a rare display of control and resolve, and it would be something the crowd would remember long after the day had passed. As the official's words echoed through the crowd, the atmosphere began to settle into a calm rhythm once again. The excitement of the royal visit resumed, and the people slowly returned to enjoying the day. The royal guards, unshaken by the earlier disruption, continued their duties as if nothing had happened. The crowd's murmurs faded, and people once again focused on the royal event, their attention now directed at the dignitaries and the ceremonial proceedings that were unfolding before them. Though the moment had passed, the incident with the drunk man had left a lasting impression on many. Whispers could still be heard here and there among the crowd as people discussed what had just happened. Most were in awe of the calm and skill displayed by the royal guard. They couldn't help but marvel at how effortlessly the guard had deflected the bottle, a move so precise and graceful it seemed almost unreal. To many, it was a reminder of the professionalism and discipline required for such roles. For others, it was simply a moment they would not soon forget. As the day wore on, it became clear that the event had returned to its intended course. The royal entourage moved through the streets, and the ceremonial activities continued without any further interruptions. Yet, despite the resumption of normalcy, the crowd was still abuzz with talk of the incident. Some had witnessed the bottle's flight through the air. Others had seen the guards' quick response. Everyone had their own take on what had happened, but one thing was certain. No one had expected the situation to resolve so effortlessly. The incident, though brief, had proven that even in moments of chaos, calm could prevail. The drunk man, who had once caused such a stir, had long since vanished from the scene. The royal guard, who had handled the disruption with such poise, had returned to his post, his presence as commanding as ever, but the memory of how he had dealt with the situation lingered in the minds of the crowd. For many, it was an example of how to face even the most unexpected challenges with dignity and control. As the royal event continued, some of the bystanders began to reflect on the nature of the day's events. It had started out as a simple celebration, a gathering to honor the royal family, but the interruption had turned it into something much more memorable. The professionalism of the royal guard had turned what could have been a disastrous moment into a reminder of strength and calm. It had shown that, even in moments of uncertainty, someone could step in and restore order without a single misstep. The day eventually drew to a close, and the crowd began to disperse. Some people made their way home, still discussing the earlier event, while others continued to enjoy the remainder of the royal festivities. But no matter where they went or what they did, the story of the guard's incredible reaction would stay with them for some time. It was a story that would be passed on, retold by many, and remembered as a remarkable moment of calm in a chaotic world. For the royal guards, however, it was just another day on the job. They didn't seek praise or recognition for their actions. They simply did their duty, as they had been trained to do. But for everyone who had witnessed the events unfold, it was a powerful reminder that in the face of adversity, sometimes the best response is a calm, controlled one. And that, in itself, was a lesson many would carry with them long after the day had ended. As the crowd slowly dispersed and the royal event continued, the echoes of the earlier incident with the drunk man seemed to fade into the background. Yet, for many of the people who had witnessed the scene, it would not be easily forgotten. The memory of the royal guard's swift and calm response lingered in the minds of those who had seen it firsthand. It wasn't just the action itself that left an impression, but the quiet professionalism with which it had been handled. The guard's movement had been so effortless, so controlled that it seemed almost impossible. In the days that followed, the story began to spread. What had started as a small incident had turned into something much bigger, a conversation topic that would be shared among friends, families, and coworkers. People would recount the moment when the drunk man had thrown the bottle, and they would marvel at the guard's quick reflexes and unshaken demeanor. To many, it had become a symbol of grace under pressure, of how a moment of chaos could be transformed into something orderly with just the right response. Some in the crowd who had initially been uncertain about what to expect from the royal event now found themselves looking at the royal guards in a different light. The guards weren't just there to protect. They were there to reassure, to keep calm in situations that could easily spiral out of control. They were the silent pillars of authority, unflinching even when faced with unexpected disruptions. And for the people who had witnessed the scene, that realization made all the difference. They had seen firsthand that the guards were not just figures in uniforms. They were trained professionals, capable of handling situations with a level of expertise that most people could only dream of. For the royal family and the rest of the royal entourage, the event proceeded without further incident. The rest of the day unfolded smoothly, with dignitaries and guests continuing to enjoy the festivities. But even as the event continued, the crowd couldn't help but glance back at the royal guards stationed throughout the area. The guards had become something more than just protectors. They had become symbols of strength and composure, reminding everyone that even in the face of unpredictability, calm could always prevail. Over time, the incident became part of the city's unofficial history. It would be recounted in the years to come, not as a moment of violence or chaos, but as a moment where one guard's action had calmed an entire crowd and turned an uncomfortable situation into a story of control and poise. People would tell their children about how they had witnessed the guard's quick thinking, and those stories would live on, shaping the way the community remembered that particular day. And for the Royal Guards themselves, the event was just another day on the job. They continued to serve with the same dedication and professionalism that they always did, not seeking recognition or praise for their actions. But the impact they had left on the crowd was undeniable. Their quiet, steadfast presence had turned a potentially dangerous situation into a testament to the power of calm, collected responses. As the royal visit came to an end, the crowd dispersed, and the city returned to its usual pace. But for everyone who had been there that day, the memory of how a small moment of chaos had been handled with grace would remain a powerful reminder of the importance of staying calm under pressure. It was a lesson in strength, resilience, and the quiet power of professionalism, one that would be remembered for a long time.